Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike Nelson here, and we are back with the Flex Diet podcast. All things to improve body composition, add muscle, improve performance, do all of it without destroying your health in the process. Today on the podcast, we've got my good buddy, Joel Jamieson. We're talking all about the impact of the aerobic system, training, and doing a more deep dive on heart rate variability. So, Joel is one of the original people who was into HRV way back in the day. He was one of the original people with, at that time, was the Omega Wave system. So I've been fortunate enough to know Joel for, man, probably over a decade and a half now, and it's been great to bounce all sorts of items off him over the years. And I think you'll enjoy this podcast covering everything HRV related and more. I wanted to let you know that the Physiologic Flexibility Certification will open again starting this October 14th, 2024. So if you're looking for ways to increase your body's ability to become more resilient, increase your recoverability, I guess if that's a word, become more anti-fragile with the next level interventions, the PhysFlex is for you. So in this, we cover the four main pillars, which are temperature regulation, so everything from cold water immersion to sauna to exercising in the heat. Number two is pH changes. This includes everything from true high-intensity work. How do you actually do that? What does that look like? What other ways you can measure it? Breathing techniques, and even all the way down to breath holds, superventilation methods, and then also zone 2 cardio. The third part is an expanded fuels related to metabolic flexibility, but here we're focusing primarily on lactate and ketones. So lactate happens primarily when you run a ton of carbohydrates through the system, and then ketones happen when you run primarily a bunch of fat through the system. And there are some actually very cool cases for both of those. And then pillar number 4 is regulation of oxygen and CO2, basically breathing. So you hear everything again from different types of breathing techniques, nasal breathing, should you do it all the time or not? How does your body regulate oxygen and CO2 for better performance? So if you're interested in that, check out the link below. Go to physiologicflexibility.com for all the info. If you're already on the newsletter, you'll be able to get all the info coming up very soon. So I'm super stoked about that. Speaking of ketones, we've got our friends over at Tecton. If you're looking for an exogenous ketone ester, I know those are all kind of big words, but you can consume a ketone drink and get into a high state of ketosis, all without doing a ketogenic diet. In fact, you can get high levels of ketones within about 20 minutes. And this is very cool because you don't have to do a ketogenic diet to get the benefits of ketones. You can still do this in the face of your normal diet. And we talk about this in the PhysFlexer. You can even do this in the wake of higher amounts of carbohydrates at certain times also, which is pretty cool. And then we do have the Flex 4 this week. Go to miketnelson.com/flex4, FLEX4. And due to we had limited time with Joel, I wanted to get the maximum amount of information I could from him. So I did the Flex 4 this week. So if you want to hear from me and want to hear what my top 4 things are related to HRV in less than about 5 minutes, go to miketnelson.com/flex4. That'll also put you onto the daily newsletter. You get all super cool Fitness Insider info for free delivered to your inbox. If you're already on there, then you will get the Flex 4 for this week delivered to you directly. So without further ado, here is Joel Jamieson, and enjoy. Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast, and we're here with Joel Jamieson. How's it going, sir?
Going well. How about you?
Doing good. Thank you for coming on here. I appreciate it. I've been following your stuff for quite some time, and I think the first time we officially met in person was back in the Was it Paleo Effect Days? I think
Yeah,
weren't we on a panel together at some point, I
yeah,
think.
that sounds right. That was a long time ago. That must have
That
been
was a
at
long
least,
time ago.
I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. I don't know if paleo effects is even still a
Yeah.
thing or not, but yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, I saw you again. You gave a great talk out in Vegas at a ROMS event last year. So it's great to see that. And one of the things I want to talk about is you're one of, I call the original people with HRV. So when I started doing HRV, it was a few mega wave people, and that was about it. Do you want to tell us how you got involved with HRV, especially back in the day when no one really knew about
Yeah,
it? Plus,
it
it's an
was
entertaining story.
yeah, it was really early on. There was a guy named Randy Huntington, and Randy was the head in track and field jumps for USA Track and Field, and Coach Mike Powell was just a very experienced, very knowledgeable coach and was in my area. And I just asked him for, I don't know, tips, strategies, advice, that kind of stuff, because I was young in the game. And we talked some train stuff and then gave me a phone number to call and said, call this guy, which was an unexpected thing. But I'm like, okay, Randy knows what he's doing. So call this guy up and he's got a thick Russian accent and still doesn't really tell me what he is doing or what I need to learn, but it just says meet him in an airport hotel down by Seattle.
That's not
And I go,
sketchy at all.
yeah, it's not
Meet
sketchy
some
at all. I
Russian
mean,
dude in an airport hotel.
yeah,
You just got his
if
phone
it wasn't
number.
Randy, I probably wouldn't have gone. But at this point, like I said, I'm young and I trust Randy. And so I go down this airport and this dude comes out of a trench coat with a briefcase and he's 6'2", like literally looks like KGB and has an accent to match and basically proceeds to tell me to lay down on a couch and take my shirt off as he then connects a bunch of electrodes to me. And I'm like, what is going on
What
here?
am I
Right. Like,
doing?
yeah, what is happening? And so he proceeds to have me go through this just to sit there basically for 2.5 minutes and then starts telling me about my recovery and sympathetic function and starts using a bunch of jargon that at the time just didn't make a whole lot of sense, but he was pretty spot on with how I was built physiologically and what I'd done for workouts and heart rates. And he just knew a lot of stuff that was mind boggling to me because this is, I think back then mobile phones were at like snake level or maybe it was still pagers. I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Was this what,
Um, it
2003,
was right around 2000.
2004?
I know it was before that. I want to say it's
Okay.
2001 or
Oh,
2002.
wow. Okay.
So again, like I think phones were around at like the Nokia 900 or whatever that one was, and pagers were still around. So this is
Yep.
really early technology days. There was not Fitbit and Uras and Apple Watch, like none of that. No, not even apps. So it was just completely mind-boggling to me that someone could plug me into a computer and connect me to electrodes with that, and then have any knowledge about my training history and recovery levels and all that sort of stuff. And I'd studied the Russian stuff. I'd spent some time at Mel Sif's house for those who are familiar with Mel Sif, and read all the old Russian and Eastern European weightlifting manuals. And so I recognized that the Eastern Europeans and the Russians were very different in their approach to training than the Americans were. And this seemed like the perfect Russian secret, right? Which was intriguing, obviously. And so, long story short, he tells me this thing is like 35 grand and tells me the story of the Omega Wave, which is what this thing is. And of course, I don't have $35,000, but I was ambitious and I offered to help. At the time, I was interning at University of Washington, I think back then, and they were trying to get it into collegiate scene and the professional coaching ranks of America. And so I just said, hey, I'll help get this thing out there as much as I can, and I'll spread the word, and I'll do this, and I'll do that. And so he basically, made a deal where I could make payment plan on it and pay them monthly and get a much discounted system rather than spending 35 grand, which I couldn't have ever done. And away I went. So I actually got an old used system and very little education to go with it because I think they were just trying to get it to me as cheaply as possible. And so here you go, figure this thing out. And so that was ultimately what I ended up having to do. But yeah, it's 24 years ago basically, or close to it. So it's been crazy to see the journey, as I'm sure you've witnessed from those very early days to now it being on millions of devices all over the place.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I think the first time I heard about Omega Wave was 2003, 2004. At the time, it was like this mythical Russian system that was $30,000 and they could do all this stuff non-invasively. And at the time, I didn't know anyone who actually had one. And I hunted down Landon Evans when he was out in
Yeah.
the Pacific Northwest. I
Yep. So I
was,
actually introduced, if I remember correctly, I think I introduced Landon. Well, Landon was connected to McLaughlin, Mark
yep.
McLaughlin. I think I introduced Mark McLaughlin to it, though I could be mistaken on that. I can't remember, but he was one of the early guys as well. And I don't remember if I introduced him to it or somebody else did, but he was one of the other really early guys into the whole thing.
Yeah, and I remember going to an ACSM conference somewhere near him and just dropped him in, I don't know if I got his email or what, and said, "Hey, I want to learn about Omega Wave. Like, how much do you charge for a consulting session?" And
Yep.
he's, I don't know, just take me out to a fancy steak dinner and I'll just answer your questions. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. So he was like 3.5 hours away from the conference. So I get in my rental car, drive out there at night, go have a steak dinner with him. He was super cool, like answered a lot of questions. And then it's 10:30 at night. He's, well, do you want to be tested on it? I'm like, sure. So he brings me back to his facility at 10:30 at night, hooks up all these electrodes, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. I drive back to my hotel. I think I get back there at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, sleep 2 hours, go to the conference or whatever. And it was, to me, the most fascinating thing about it was the little data I had on myself was it was pretty accurate. Like it was telling me detox pathways and aerobic performance. And
Yep.
I was like, it appeared to be relatively close. And I was just blown away that something that was non-invasive, you're basically lying down as like a 3-minute test they did, and it spits out all this information that, again, my N of one appeared to be pretty damn accurate.
Yeah, and that was exactly my experience. I mean, again, you're like trying to understand training. There's just so many unknown variables, and you're like,
Right.
let's be honest, there's just so much guesswork, right? And for someone to be able to look at you, put objective numbers around different parts of your physiology, and then to be accurate was mind-boggling. It still is in some ways, but yeah, it was really groundbreaking. That's why I was just like, I've got to figure out how to have this thing. I don't care what I have to do or negotiate or whatever it takes. I'm going to figure out how to use this thing because I was like, this answers so many questions and this can provide so much insight into the black box of training and fitness and health and all the things that go along with that. So it was something I really felt strongly was going to be the future. And it's taken 20 years or whatever to get to that point, but I think I was on the right track.
And early on, once you had the full system, so then I proceeded to basically pester the ever living shit out of everyone I could find who had a full system. I know I sent Landon a bunch of questions. I know Cal Dietz eventually bought a system, which was hilarious because he's, yeah, I got an Omega Wave system. I was like, oh, that's cool. He's, don't tell my wife how much I spent on it because the university wasn't going to buy it for him. So he just bought it with
That's
his
funny.
own money,
Crazy. That's
which,
crazy.
yeah, he's like, don't do that. That's not wise. I'm like, oh, okay, great. What did you find using that system that you found was the most useful? Did you use it like on a daily to try to figure out what to do for training? Did you look at more just trends over time or both of those?
Yeah, so when I first started using it, like I said, I think I was finishing up internship at the University of Washington, and then I followed a strength coach named Bill Gillespie over to the Seahawks, and then I opened up my own facility not too long after that. And the first thing I noticed when I'm just measuring people and seeing what it's looking at, I said, I want to see what's the difference between a Seahawk athlete and an average person. You're like, holy shit, like they are just built very differently. Their recovery was incredible. Their performance metrics that it showed you across their different heart rate zones was very different. Like their CNS was higher. Just all the sort of stuff that you would expect in a professional athlete was very obvious when I looked at that. And then the second thing is when I really started measuring just everyday people coming into my gym, I had a mixture of athletes, Microsoft executives, high school kids, kind of anybody and everybody. The most obvious thing to me was that the workout was a much smaller part of their recovery and overall stress than I expected it to be. Because as a coach, you just think that the workout is everything and the lifestyle is a small piece afterwards, but you just see that flipped on its head. You realize that the 23 hours they're spending outside the gym have such a big impact on their recovery and everything else compared to just the 1 hour they spent in the gym. And you realize, oh, this person didn't even do a hard workout yesterday, or maybe they took the day off, but they still don't look very good today. Well, what happened? And you find out, oh, they slept 4 hours because there was a big deadline at work or there was something going on. And so for me, it was incredibly eye-opening on training and lifestyle and the balance between them. And it just makes you recognize that the body is under stress at all times to some degree. And even though you're under high level stress for that workout for an hour, you're under different types or lower levels of stress. But for 23 hours and sleep and all these things play such a huge role. And I just didn't know that until I could start seeing the data of how people are reacting to their lifestyle, not just their workouts with me.
Yeah, and would you agree that if we want to put a definition to recovery, so training, obviously, we're going to be pushing the system away from homeostasis on purpose.
Yep.
Would you agree that recovery, in my little air quotes, is just getting back to homeostasis faster so we can basically just shove it away from homeostasis again.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two aspects really. The first is that process you said of we need to restore homeostasis and get back to where we were. And I think there's also the adaptive part where
Sure.
we're probably close back to homeostasis if we were to measure blood pressure and blood sugar and these sorts of homeostatically driven things, but we still have to increase protein synthesis to adapt to that workout. And really the reason that our body adapts that workout is so the next time we face it, our homeostasis is less disrupted. That's the whole point, right? That's why our body adapts. So I look at this recovery as just this is a process. Like step one, get the body back to normal physiological ranges where it's comfortable. And number two, make sure that next time you encounter the same thing, you're not as disrupted, you're not as pushed away from normal. And that's where the adaptations are coming from or why they're there. So I think it's just this process everybody goes through as part of that end goal of survival.
And related to that, and then I'll ask you about BioForce and some HRV stuff. What have you seen that helps the most with recovery? And the second aspect of that question is, what parts of that do you feel are trainable? Right. So I'm
Sure.
thinking like aerobic base. So people have a big aerobic base. I've noticed they just tend to recover faster. Aerobic capacity is something that's also pretty darn trainable in most people.
Yeah, and I think from a training standpoint, that's definitely the most impactful thing that you can develop. And it's simply because, in my mind, the recovery that happens after the workout is entirely driven by energy from the aerobic system. You're not producing anaerobic energy to recover, and the more efficient and the better aerobic capacity you have, the more there is that potential to recover a bit faster. And then there's also just, we know that higher levels of VO2 and overall aerobic fitness are associated with higher levels of vagal tone, which is the parasympathetic system, which is driving recovery in most aspects. So we know that there's the clear mechanistic relationship there. And then outside of the sphere of training, I'd say sleep isn't trainable per se, but sleep has a huge impact simply because that's when your body is the most shifted towards recovery since it's not having to expend energy doing anything else. And the more you can impact sleep in a positive way, the more you can facilitate recovery happening more efficiently. And then I think on top of that, I wouldn't say trainable, but you can start to add in some recovery modalities, which honestly, a lot of them are either just these little stimulations that cause that parasympathetic system to react afterwards, or things that are just relaxing if your sympathetic system's too active. Those little recovery strategies and different techniques can definitely play a role, but they can't really override if you have a shitty diet and lifestyle and sleep is bad and your training's bad. Any sauna or whatever, cold plunge, whatever you want to do isn't really going to make much difference if your lifestyle and your training is shitty to begin with. So I think it starts from lifestyle number one, training number two, and then everything after that.
Have you seen that different people respond to different sort of recovery things? So, for example, I've seen some rather high level athletes who, when I first started working with some of them, I just thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with these people? Like their nutrition's probably just amazing. Am I going to really be helpful to them at all? And then you look at not all of them, but a high percentage of them, you're like, you're making $4 million a year on fucking Skittles and God knows whatever else you're
Yeah.
eating. And
Yep.
that some and some people just nutrition doesn't seem to affect them as much. And there seems to be different variables, but the one variable I've noticed that affects everyone is sleep. Or sleep, it just seems like if you're not getting enough sleep, unless you're a Duck2 mutant, which there's only a few walking around, that seemed to impact everyone at some point. But I would see crazy stuff on nutrition, as long as they got enough calories, like they seem to be okay acutely. We could argue long term they might do better. Have you noticed that there's a variability even in recovery, so that these general statements are true, but if you drill down to an individual level, that I think it's more variable than what people realize from the outside looking in.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think the biggest thing, if you want to take away one single thing away from using heart rate variability and you're looking at thousands of people, is that everybody is different. Like you said, there's definitely some universal truths and that more
Sure.
good quality sleep is better and that some foods are probably better than others in general. But like you said, there's a lot of variability there and genetics make a huge difference. And that's something that you take away from this is I view you and me and people as we're this net product of our genetics impacting our lifestyle, or impacting our environment throughout our entire life. So if you're 45 years old, like I am, and you have certain genetics and you've been raised and you have certain history of training and diet, like you're going to be very different than somebody who is at a different age with complete different genetics that grew up doing very different things because all those interactions have been vastly different and they're going to end up being very different in terms of what they respond well to, what they respond poorly to, how they perform, all those variables are very individual. And I would say it applies to recovery, it applies to training, it applies to diet, it applies to how you deal with mental stress, it really applies to everything. We're very different. Even though we have the same underlying physiology, but we're very different. We look at the big picture of how we interact with things around us, including training and nutrition and all that. And secondly, I would second that point of what you just made, which is we have this idea in our heads that these elite level athletes are there because they like train like robots and they eat all these perfect foods and they focus on recovery and they do all these amazing things. Like bullshit. Like some of them, yes, there's no doubt there are some of them that fall in that category, but the vast majority of them, no. These people have just been better than everybody else since they were born because they were born with the right genetic lottery. And don't get me wrong, a lot of them have worked hard and most of them have worked hard and been consistent. You still have to train and do those things.
Oh, sure.
But when you watch people win like NFL MVP rushing titles on Doritos and Mountain Dew, and like you said, Skittles probably for snacks, and maybe not getting great sleep and having relationship problems in the middle of the season, it doesn't matter. They can just go out and run for touchdowns because that's just what their body is genetically predisposed to do. And they're just built differently than everybody else. And they can succeed despite their training or despite their lifestyle rather than because of it a lot of times. Now, I will say the one thing where I've seen that maybe play out is over the length of a career. You see the athletes who have really shitty lifestyles pay the price for it sooner or later. Eventually down
Yeah.
the road, they tend to have shorter careers, I think, in the pros than the ones who are smarter and really do take care of themselves and train right. But I've seen people win world championships and all kinds of titles and all these things with poor training, bad lifestyle, but you win the genetic lottery and you can get away with a lot.
Yeah, to me, that's what's crazy. And you see some of their HRV scores because you think, at least my thought going into it was, oh, okay, they're just really good at compensating. Like they're paying an acute cost. Like they can just compensate for it. And then you see some of their HRV scores and you're like, son of a bitch, that looks pretty damn good. Like, how do you...
Yeah.
It's like, how do you do that? That's so crazy.
Yeah. You just, like I said, until you start looking at the data and working with these athletes, you just can't get an idea of how many of these athletes are just God-given gift, however you want to look at it. Like they're just built in a way that allows them to get away with a lot of stuff that the average person just couldn't. Like they just couldn't. It's just how we're built. Like I said, my grandma smoked cigarettes for 70 something years and then finally died of lung cancer at like 86.
Oh, wow.
But she got away with it for 70 years, drinking, smoking. The average lifespan is like 78 for men and like 81 for women. And she smoked for 70 years, drank for 60 plus years, didn't work out a day in her life, didn't eat well, makes it to 86. Other people can eat really well, they can have healthy lifestyles, and they get cancer in their 50s. Like it's just the way the nature card works.
Yeah, I remember talking to Ben House about this too, and we're both remarking how the more people we've worked with, the more impressed about the variability from one person to the next. And when you're dealing with the elite of the elite, they are, with almost without exception, the statistical outliers of everybody else.
Yeah,
And you
they
start
are.
getting 1, 2 standard deviations away from the norm, and it's crazy different.
Yeah, exactly. I remember growing up, I was obsessed with bodybuilding, like probably a lot of kids are when
Sure.
they're back in the day. It was Flex Magazine, Muscle and Fitness.
Yep.
You start lifting weights, and then you're like, I just don't look like these guys.
No.
I don't have the symmetry. Like my calves are half their size, and you just get frustrated because you read these magazine programs. You're like, oh, here's my bicep program, here's my ab program, and you do those, and you're like, I still don't look like these damn guys. And then you see somebody like you come across like an actual high level bodybuilder, and you're like, oh my god, this guy's training just must be so smart and so unique. And you watch him work out, you're like, what the fuck? They're doing the same shit. They're not doing anything differently. And you realize like they can do the exact same workout or they can work out less and they're just going to boom, look like a pro bodybuilder. And there's obviously drugs involved and all that. But even without those, like you will just never look like them because you just don't have the genetics that they have. And that was my first realization that I could train like anyone. I could follow a pro bodybuilder's workout and it would not make me a pro bodybuilder. And so it's this realization that following somebody else's program because they can do something really successfully is probably not most often the best recipe for success because that person can do that because they're that person, not because that program is maybe some magic thing that they have the secret answers to.
Yeah, I remember seeing a picture of Lee Priest when he was like 18 or something.
Yep.
And you're like, what the holy hell is that? And I think the rumor was he had started training when he was 13. But still, you're just like, that's insane. That's
Yep.
with a couple of years of training. I remember hearing guys who used to lift with Paul Dillette and
Oh yeah.
saying that you would do tricep press downs with 50 pounds, get a pump, and then just walk out of the gym. He was like
Yeah. Yep.
notorious for just like kind of half-assing most of the training. No one ever really saw him train too terribly hard. And yeah, the guy was a freak.
Chris Cormier, whatever his last name was,
Yeah,
trained at the gym I was at for quite a while. Same thing. Like you just watch him and you're like, why isn't he doing something different than I am? Because he looks way different. And you just again, I was like 18, I think, when I started watching him train. I'm like, I can do that same shit all day long, and I don't look anywhere close to that. And you just again, you see the genetic influence and the genetic anomalies. I think bodybuilding is a good example of it because it's so visually obvious that you're not like them. And unfortunately, you don't see that on the like performance side because
right.
a lot of times athletes, I don't know, a pro baseball player or a pro like football player look different, but a lot of pro golfer, these athletes that have remarkable skill levels and they have things that aren't as visually tangible because they don't look different than you and I, but they still have something way different that we don't because we're not them and we're not that level. And of course, training plays a role, but they have something genetically different than everybody else. Otherwise, you couldn't get to the elite of the elite in sports where there are hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of people doing it. And you're talking about the top 100. There's a reason they're in the top 100, and genetics play a big role.
Yeah, the two stories that makes me laugh is my buddy Sean Mishka. He was training, I can't remember who the two players were, but they NFL players, professionals. One guy on his right side he was working with, and he was just training both of them. The guy on his left side had a left ankle injury or something like that, so they were walking him through training. So he's working with the athlete on the right, and they were doing some box jumps, just to jump up to a box type thing. And he looks over, and the guy on his left is standing on top of the box. He's like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, I told you you're not supposed to jump up. You don't want to get injured your ankle or whatever." And he's, "Oh, it's okay, coach. I just jumped up on one foot." And he's, "Holy shit."
Yeah. Yep. They're just that's the game. Again, Kent Johnson, who was a strength coach for the Seahawks when I was there, he was telling me because he worked with Brett Favre and Reggie White, the
Mm-hmm.
Packers, for a number of years. And I was like, "Oh, do you have any good stories about any of those guys?" And he said that
The
he
Reggie
said
White
that
story is the best.
yeah, he said Reggie White had wanted to learn Olympic lifting because Kent had an Olympic lifting background. And I think he basically said he was like, he'd never done any Olympic lifting. He lifted weights, he was strong, but he'd never done any Olympic lifts. And so he like shows him, I think, with a bar, and then he puts 125 or 135 on. He's showing him a hang clean and just trying to get some basic, here's the mechanics, work on a little bit. And he like walked away, was working with somebody else. He comes back and he's hang clean like 4 or 5. Like might not have been the best technique in the world, but he was doing 2 or 3 reps like 405. Never did it before. Didn't matter. Like he was just machine.
Yeah, it's like Andy Bolton. That's supposedly the first time he ever lifted. I think he squatted 500 and deadlifted like 600 or something like that. Granted, he went on to be the first guy to pull over 1,000 pounds, but still, it's just like just bonkers.
Well, shit, I had Bob Sapp come in the gym many years, 20 years
Oh
plus years
wow.
ago. And Bob, I know Bob for a long time. Bob hadn't lifted weights in like a couple of years at the time. He had been just fighting in low and actually high level stuff at K1, and he just wasn't lifting. He was just because he's so damn big. And he'd just been trying to learn the skill of fighting, so he really hadn't been lifting. And he's, I haven't bench pressed in 3 years or something. I'm like, well, take it easy, Bob. He close grip incline 405 for a triple.
Oh Jesus.
And he hadn't lifted in years, hadn't benched in years. But and he's got massively long arms. He's like 6'5". It's not like he was
Yeah, he's a
a power lifter.
massive human.
Yeah, Bob's about as much of a genetic example as you can possibly get. It's just a monster. So yeah.
Yeah, and last NFL story is until you've interacted with these athletes in person to see like some of the linemen and see how big they are, and then to watch them move in person, to me, that was just
Yeah.
that was mind blowing because you see them and you're like, okay, I know this is a good athlete. I know they're, and then to see them move that fast of a human that's that large, that to me that just blew my mind entirely.
I think NFL linemen, and then I would say like some of the big NBA guys, because the NBA athletes, when you look at the totality, I still would say they're probably, in my mind, the greatest combination of athletic skills because they are fast as hell. They have great aerobic endurance because they're running up and down the court all day. They're explosive, obviously. They can jump insane amounts or insane heights. They're very coordinated to, be able to dribble and shoot the way that they do. They have just this total set of skills, and they're huge. They're monsters at the same time. So I think if you look at just physical and just all around performance characteristics, like they are to me the kind of the highest level because they've just got so many different skill sets and or physical sets, I should say, and they're just monsters physically at the same time.
Yeah, the ability for high level athletes to compensate is crazy. I was working on an NHL guy who was one of the top NHL guys for deflecting pucks midair into the net. And we were doing some visual stuff on him, just basically trying to find any errors in his visual movements. And so I was with this other guy who was working with him, and we found one thing where we saw his eye skip a little bit and then came back on target. And then I went back to repeat like the exact same movement again, and the athlete had already subconsciously fixed the eye movement. And I asked him, I'm like, and I talked to the coach behind me, like, do you see that? He's like, yeah. And I asked the athlete, I'm like, do you know what you just did? He's like, no. He
Yeah.
subconsciously had already figured out the error and fixed the error and had no idea that he had actually fixed it. And that was like the
Yep.
only error we could find in his system for 5 minutes of doing stuff. It's just, yeah, crazy to see.
It is, yeah. So moral of the story is unless you are these athletes, you don't need to try to copy what they do
No.
or do their workouts or their program. You need to figure out what works for you because you are a very different person than they are.
And related to HRV for differences, do you still find that if HRV is showing that someone is more on the parasympathetic or sympathetic side, if they do want to do different training or recovery modalities, do you still have people do different things? The thought being there that you're trying to get them back to baseline faster, but if someone is very much on the sympathetic stress side, you might do a different intervention than if someone's showing that they're really more on the parasympathetic side.
Yeah, to some extent. I think you're if someone's really shifted towards a sympathetic and they're just not coming down, then I'm much more inclined to use relaxation type things, meditation, whatever it is, music, whatever it is, you can get them to just turn that sympathetic tone off. And I don't usually, for most people, want to use like a sympathetic stimulus unless I know I've used it before and it worked for them. But most time, if someone just jammed that sympathetic system on, I want to try to do things to get them to just relax and activate that parasympathetic system. Sometimes if you see someone the opposite, like they're really using a little bit of sympathetic stimulus to turn that sympathetic system on, can help bring that back down and get them back to where they should be. But again, I would say the same thing applies here. It's a very individual thing.
Sure.
Different strategies will work differently for different people, even sometimes different times that work differently. So I think that's just the one thing you can never really take for granted is like there's no one formula or one protocol. You're like, oh, in this situation, this always works. Like the body's just, it's too dynamic to be that predictable.
Yeah, and you find that what I found is that if people like doing a certain thing, it just generally seems to work better too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a study that Sapolsky, if your listeners know, he has talked about where
Yeah.
there was this mouse study, if I remember right, where one mouse could run on a wheel voluntarily, and
Hmm.
then the second mouse was forced to run on the wheel when the first mouse was running. And then they looked at the actual physical benefits in terms of like health markers or whatever, and the mouse that was forced to run when the other one was given the option to, like the forced mouse didn't have the same benefits. Like it was worse for them even though they're doing the same physical activity, you would assume there'd be like the same physical outcomes in terms of changes in whatever they were measuring, but there weren't. Like that, it actually their mental stress of always being like, shit, I don't want to run. When do I have to run? What's going on? This guy's just that mental, physical connection of stress changed the outcome of the workout. So I think it's the exact same thing with physical recovery measures. If you hate doing something, then it's probably not recovery. If you really enjoy it, then it probably activates circuits in the brain that make it more beneficial to you.
Yeah. And so then you went on initially to do, I know, HRV with BioForce, which we met up
Yep.
with Simon. And was the goal with that just to get an app-based, a little bit more inexpensive system to more of the masses instead of the $35,000 Omega Wave system?
Yeah, exactly. So I initially talked to Val and the Megwave team about, I said, you guys need a mobile app. Like this has
Right.
got to get out to more people. And at the time they were very focused on the sport market and the performance market, because that's where their company had been built from. So I worked with them for about a year. I went down to their headquarters in Eugene and tried to work with them to build a mobile app. And it just became quickly like they just didn't have the bandwidth. They didn't have the development team and the funding at that point in time to develop it. And so they were just not going to do it. I just recognized like as much as they want to, they just don't have the team in place. It was a bunch of like hardcore Russian developers that were working for him, and they just didn't have the capability of pivoting. So that's when I was like, I need this to be more accessible to the athletes I work with. Because the biggest problem is I'd only be able to measure them when I could see them. Like they'd come in the gym
Right.
periodically and train, but I had no idea what was happening other than that. And I had athletes I was working with from different parts of the world that were coming in for a training camp, but I could see them, and then they would go home and want me to give them a program. And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know what your recovery is when you're home. You get so used to that data and using it. So yeah, the BioForce was just my first attempt at making it accessible and affordable, and yet still trying to make it as accurate as possible. And so I basically took the iAthlete with Simon, and then I measured a bunch of data with MegaWave, and I tried to replicate the results I would have seen in MegaWave with what the data was showing in at that point BioForce. And so I just took their algorithm, changed the testing protocol, changed the filtering, changed a bunch of the data, and tried to make it as close to what I was seeing with the MegaWave as possible. Because the MegaWave was, to their credit, MegaWave gave you every measure of at least all the main measures of HRV. It gave you a lot more data than most people were used to seeing, and it was accurate. And so I wanted to try to develop something that was as close as possible without being 30 grand in the process.
Yeah, and that's right about the same time I met up with Simon too, and I was through my buddy Dr. James Heathers, who said, "Hey, this guy's got a app," and I think it might have been Carl Valley who introduced me originally, that can do HRV, and I was like, "What? What are you talking about? I had 20 grand of used equipment at the University of Minnesota to cobble together and frickin' write MATLAB code to get it to spit out into Cubios and all this monkey motion."
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, I was like, "Oh, wow, this is crazy," and that's when I realized I could do more online training because now for inexpensive, people could do it daily. They didn't have to come into the lab. They didn't have to go to a center. They didn't have to do all that stuff because as once you get used to seeing that data with people, it's so useful. And you can do quizzes, you can do questionnaires, and you can do other things, but I found especially in high level athletes, they just tended to lie, and other people were oblivious to
Yeah.
what their stress levels were going on. So it was nice to have an actual physiologic marker to be like, hey, this is what your physiology is telling us. So now let's try to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Without it's, I could tell the analogy. If you get used to driving between point A and point B using GPS, and there are different places you haven't been, and then you want to try to figure out how to get there without a map, do you really want to go back to that?
Yeah.
No, I'm going to tell Google where I want to go, and it's going to tell me how to get there. And what's feedback? It's turn left here, turn right there. And HRV is not quite that specific, but it's giving you a lot more data of which direction you're going, so you can make sure that you're headed the right way. And if you go back to train someone without that, it's just so much guesswork. And like you said, you can ask them, how'd you sleep? Or how you feeling? Or how's your diet been? Like most people either don't know, aren't going to answer accurately, even if they do know, but it's like pulling teeth. So it just reduces the amount of guesswork tremendously if you have objective markers that are valid and accurate to be able to use and make changes to programs and coach them with it. And without it, like I said, don't get me wrong, you can still get good results and everything, but it's a whole lot harder because you're just facing so much more unknown.
Yeah. And like we talked about with the variability, like you don't know if that person's variability responds to what you're doing. And again, there's general things and general trends that are beneficial. But what I found it's super useful is to figure out what's their number one rate limiter. Is it really nutrition? Is it sleep? Is it the other things? And you can play with different things and see what their physiologic response is because most people only have so much bandwidth to do so much change at once. So that kind of allows me to figure out and pick my battles of, oh, okay, if we do this change, it looks like we're gonna get a little bit bigger response from it instead of trying to fight some of those battles for a smaller response.
Yeah, exactly. You're always trying to, I agree with the idea of you're trying to find the limiting factor that you can remove the easiest to have the biggest impact. And the higher up you go of the athletic world, the trickier that becomes. But if you don't have any objective data, again, you don't really know how much their sleep impacted them. If they aren't sleeping, if they are, you don't know how much their diet, like there's just so many unknowns. And I'll say too, I would never know like ADHD medication can have huge implications
Oh,
for that. If you don't know someone's taking it, you didn't see the data, you wouldn't know that. Recently, I had to start going on shitty statin, which I don't particularly like because I've got this terrible family history of heart disease. And so I'm trying to prevent that as much as I can. And I've seen that actually impacting it's exacerbating the workout's stress level, and you see it in higher levels of creatine kinase in the studies. Now I'm actually seeing my HRV is much more variable when I use it, or since I've been on it. So it's even stuff like that. You don't know that people are taking medications that might significantly alter their responses until you start looking at their response. You're like, whoa, what's causing this? And they're like, oh, by the way, I take this medication or whatever. And then you can like, oh, okay, this makes sense. But now I have to be aware of those sorts of things. So yeah, it just gives you so much more information to make decisions from is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I've seen that multiple times now. I remember the first time I saw it years ago. One person, their HRV on athlete score, I want to say dropped by, it was over like 11 or 12 or 15 points or something overnight, and it just stayed there. And I asked myself, what the hell happened here? And we went through everything, and they're like, oh yeah, my doctor put me on ADHD meds. And I'm like, oh, sympathomimetics, like things that stress your body out to get you to focus. Like it crushes your HRV a lot of times.
Yeah, it was interesting too. I was on Peter Tia's podcast a while back, and he was asking me about if I'd seen anything people on semaglutide or Ozempic, because it's such a big weight loss
Mm-hmm.
drug. Everyone's taking it. I don't really work that population much, honestly, but he is saying they'd seen a bunch of people's HRV decrease pretty
Uh,
significantly when you're on it. And it makes sense just intuitively thinking about it. If it's suppressing appetite to the extent that it is, there has to be some sort of influence there on the sympathetic parasympathetic system in some capacity. So anyway, you can just recognize like different medications can have pretty profound impacts on people that they might not be aware of, and they definitely aren't aware of how much it's impacting their ability to train or recover, see those sorts of things. So again, that's where HRV is such a valuable tool for the individual and for the coach.
what would you say to people who the criticism of HRV is, well, I don't measure it on my athletes because what if it's like red or it's really bad
Yeah.
before a big competition?
Yeah, I
I get
get that
this
one all the
email
time.
all the time.
Yeah, I get that one all the time too. It's if HRV could predict performance on that level, like I would have retired a long time ago because I could have been
Exactly.
betting on people that we have
Uh,
data from. But like physiology is just not that. Oh, HRV is 65, like you're gonna score 4 goals a day, or
yeah.
HRV is 62, you're gonna go get injured today. Like number one, I just try to make them recognize like performance is intersection of so many variables that a single physiological reading on a given day is not going to predict their performance. And then secondly, it's normal for the body to have decreased HRV in anticipation of a high stress event. That's the body's ramping up its system to be able to go out and perform, and it needs that sympathetic system turned on. So that there's nothing wrong or physiologically abnormal about having low HRV in a competition day or whatever. And then I would say third, if the athlete is so mentally worried about a single number on a screen, they're probably not dialed in the way they need to be mentally anyway. They're not focused on what really matters. So I tell, look, if you really don't want to measure it because you're that worried about, it's not going to make a difference either way. But I don't think there's any downside to doing it as long as the athlete understands that it's not a predictor and there's no formula out there where I could say, oh, your score is this, so here's your ability to perform today. It's just not a real factor to consider. It's not going to ever predict your performance or your injury in a given day. And I think once they start to understand that, they relax and understand it's not such a big deal.
Yeah. And I've even had them do simulation training. So, for example, if it's a power lifter, that if we've got 12 weeks before a meet, their HRV is red, their HRV average is good. I may even change their training and be like, hey, yeah, go if you feel good, go for a double or a triple, see if you can get a PR. And most of the time they're like, holy shit, I did. And you're like, cool. Right? Because like you said, it's just showing that you are more on the sympathetic side. A lot of times in a pure output sport like powerlifting, which is easy to measure, there's not skill components and other things. A lot of times you do better. But again, we're not going to want to see your HRV red every single day because that's telling us you're going to be impaired. You can't do the quality work and everything that you need to. And usually then, so you know it's probably going to be red the day before a competition. You're just like, hey, remember when we did this like 12 weeks ago? Oh yeah, I did good. Cool. Like you'll do fine. It's a single competition. Take a few extra days off. You have the luxury of taking time off in that circumstance. Not always the case, but and then usually they're like, oh, okay, they're fine.
Yeah. Really, if I looked at someone's HRV trend over 30 days and I saw it really obviously spiraling, then yeah, I might be a little concerned
Yeah,
about their performance. But that's not from one day. That's from looking at the
correct.
last 30 days. And the other thing is, if someone's really headed the wrong direction, you wouldn't not see that in their actual training performance. Like you wouldn't see
Yep.
the weights moving great if their HRV was tanking, or you would see actual physical output measures change if there was real fatigue or real things in there that were going to have a big impact on performance. So yeah, definitely have the conversation quite a bit. And once you explain it, then people are usually a lot more relaxed about it.
Yeah, and I explain HRV as it's the cost of everything you're doing. But I think sometimes people get caught up in measuring all these things on Aura and HRV and all this stuff, and I'll email them back and what was your output? If you did a max 2K on the rover or you did a whatever testing you're doing, like what did you actually do? And unfortunately, sometimes they're like, oh, I don't know. Well, you better be
Yeah,
measuring the output because that's what
good
matters. So
point.
don't forget to do that.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's people get really caught up in, again, HRV is hugely valuable, but it is just one internal physiological metric we're looking at. It has to be in context of what you're doing in the outside world. People will be like, "Oh, my HRV was really high. Does that mean I'm parasympathetically overtrained?" I'm like, "What? How's your performance?" "Oh, it's great." Well, then no, you're not
Yeah.
overtrained. Like if you're really overtrained, you will know it because your performance will reflect that. You can't just be like, "Oh, I'm overtrained because my HRV was too high." Well, no. What does your actual real performance look like? So it's all about context. HRV is like anything else. It's about what it's reflecting, and that was more than just one number. It's the rest of the things that are part of that too, and that's the output, like you said.
Yeah, and if you have really frank overtraining syndrome, not just overreached, like you're probably lying on your couch, like drooling on yourself. Like you're not doing shit for quite some time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I got one email not too long ago. It's like, "Oh, my heart rates at the same speeds were lower and my HRV is higher. Does that mean I'm overtrained?" No, that means you made progress.
Yeah, that's efficiency. That's a good
Yeah,
thing.
you're going the right direction. But they read somewhere that if you're parasympathetically overtrained, that your HRV will be high and your heart rates will be low. I'm like, yeah, but that means you aren't putting out the same power output. And you tell me you're going the same speed at lower heart rates. That
Right.
just means build aerobic fitness. So keep doing that.
Yeah. And speaking of aerobic fitness, tell us a little bit more about Morpheus and why you came up with it.
Yeah, so Morpheus is really just the evolution of BioForce, and there's two things I wanted to do there. The first is BioForce just showed you HRV, and that was really it. But as we've talked about, there's a lot of lifestyle and things outside the gym that influence that. So I wanted to use Morpheus to basically show the other data, whether it was measured with Morpheus or not. I wanted to have something that you could pull in data from Fitbits and Apple Watches and whatever other devices people had to see how activities and sleep were connected to their HRV, so they could help connect those dots. So this is before a lot of those devices were measuring HRV. Now a lot of them are, so it's not as unique to put those things together. But secondly, and most importantly, is I wanted to connect that data to people's actual workouts. And so what Morpheus does now is it takes their HRV, it takes their different lifestyle variables, and it does two things. One, it gives them heart rate zones that apply to them on that given day, because I think we had this idea that our heart rate zones are just based on percentage of max and they never shift, but heart rate zones represent intensity, and intensity is shifts relative to your workout status and your recovery and everything else. So just, I don't know, if you're a power lifter and one day 400 pounds in the bar and the squat feels light, the next day it feels heavy. That's the same weight, but it's a different intensity to you because your recovery is different. And so it's the same rules with heart rate zones. So what we do is we just adjust people's heart rate zones based on their recovery and their fitness levels and try to give them a much more accurate gauge of what their intensity is on a given day. And then we also now are able to look at their levels and give them a weekly target for how much time they should spend in each level of intensity. We have three: low, moderate, and high intensity. And we say basically, hey, other people that had similar parameters to you that we saw improvements in trained 200 minutes a week in their low intensity zone and 25 minutes a week in their moderate and 10 minutes in their high intensity zone or somewhere about that. So we give people these moving targets to try to improve their aerobic fitness, and then we adjust those over time. So my whole idea was, let's not just say, here's a bunch of data, figure out what it means. Let's take that data, give them heart rate zones that are accurate to them on a given day, and then help them make the decisions about how much volume intensity do I need in a week if I want to improve my HRV and improve my aerobic system. Now we can give them some targets that were built around real data rather than just whatever they made up.
No, that's super cool because you've probably seen this, although I think the trend's getting a little bit better. I either see from just general meatheads of all forms, no cardio because I just lift weights and I'm going to be fine. And I did a couple Metcons
Yeah. And
to,
I'm going to think that in that case, lifting weights somehow makes me more aerobically fit because my heart rate
right.
gets up, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, bro, I was squatting and my heart rate went up, right? So that's
Yeah. I mean, I
aerobic
was in my
stuff,
zone
right?
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the ooh, I'm going to do HIT, but if I really look at their output, 30, let's say 30 on, 30 off, right? Just to pick something arbitrarily. Round one's pretty good. Round two is okay. Round three is like 20% off. By the time you get to round six, you're like 50% off your output. And I think people, at least one of the things I've changed in my programming over the last several years is I program a lot more, I'd say low to moderate, longer duration, just pure old school aerobic stuff. And that really seems to work. And I think from talking to you and some of the stuff you put out, what you found, because you're actually measuring outputs and measuring HRV and measuring everything through Morpheus, have you found that most people in general would do better on the aerobic side with the kind of low to moderate intensity and not nearly as much high intensity work?
Yeah. So like when we were building the algorithm, I just want to answer one question, right? It's if we look at people over periods of time, and we chose 12 weeks, I think that's long enough to be significant. If we look at people in Morpheus that had trained for 12-week intervals, we looked at, can we figure out differences in volumes and intensities in the people who saw improvements in their aerobic fitness? And we defined that in two ways. One was an improvement in their average HRV, and two is a decrease in their resting heart rate, which would be correlative and causative to the same extent. So we said, can we see different patterns in people who saw improvements versus people who saw either no change or even potentially went the wrong direction? And then we also broke that down into, are there differences in people who are at the low, moderate, and high levels of fitness to begin with? Are there huge differences there? And the moral of the story was that the people who saw improvements more than overwhelmingly across all three groups were the ones who spent the most times at the lower intensities and less time at the higher intensities. And in some cases, just less time. And the thing we saw in the lower level of fitness, it was sometimes people who spent less overall time that saw better improvements because I think their recovery just couldn't take the higher volumes. Because we would see people who would do crazy volumes of low intensity, but their fitness level was low. So they couldn't recover from that much work. And then we saw the highest levels, it really took a high, like the people who had very high HRVs and lower heart start with, like HRVs and Morpheus, at least in the 90s, and resting heart rate in the 40s, like they need a lot of volume, just a lot of volume and very little intensity percentage wise in the grand scheme of things. But it maybe not surprisingly, it shook out around like that number you hear of the 80-20 rule. Like it was pretty close to that actually. Like most people that saw improvements, somewhere around 80% of their total time was spent at the lower intensities, and around 15, 20-ish was at the higher intensities. And we saw people that spent 25, 30% at the high intensities almost always went the wrong direction, or at best case, they just plateaued and didn't really improve. And so it just proved, it showed us that the idea of, hey, like you really do need a lot of lower intensity work relative to the high intensity work, because most people just can't recover from that amount of real high intensity work. It just validated that, and that's where the recommendations now come from in Morpheus.
And do you have like a rough, if you go in hours per week, like how much that kind of low to moderate aerobic stuff is? And I know it's going to vary depending upon if you're, but someone who's like in an intermediate to higher kind of fitness level, because I think hearing it in time is probably more than what people intuitively are going to think.
Yeah, I would say 2 to 4 hours,
Yeah,
depending on the fitness level and everything else of that sort of steady state work. Now, the thing is, in Morpheus, we couldn't measure exactly what they were doing, so we have
sure.
to infer that to some extent. But I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that somewhere between 2 and 4 hours is where the vast majority of people are going to see benefits. Now, if you want to get to the really high levels, you're going to have to go 5, 8 if you're an endurance athlete trying to push limits. But your average person who needs to improve aerobic fitness for longevity purposes, I would say 2 to 4 hours is the kind of sweet spot. 2 being the low end and 4 being the top part. Where if you want to do 5, 6, 7 hours, you better have decent recovery, and lifting weights on top of that is another stress. So you got to just put that all together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And how can people find out more about you and Morpheus and everything else you got going on?
Sure, just 8weeksout.com is the website with articles and videos and courses, all that sort of stuff, certification for coaches, and then trainwithmorpheus.com is where they can find everything at Morpheus. So I'm excited. We just have started actually redesigning Morpheus from the ground up, just taking what we've learned over the years and what we really want to improve and rebuilding it from scratch. So I think by the end of Q1 of next year in 2025, maybe before that, we'll have a really big redesign with a whole bunch of new cool stuff and Apple Watch app and all kinds of fascinating stuff that we're working on. So I'm excited to get that out there because I think people are going to love it.
Cool. Can you give us a little hint on anything that they might see in the new version, or is it still top secret?
Still top secret, but like I
Okay.
said, I think that the biggest thing we've been getting asked for a long time has been the Apple Watch app. So we will have an Apple Watch app. We're going to have a web dashboard for the people who really want to dig deeper into their analytics. And eventually we'll be able to deliver workouts through Morpheus, and coaches can deliver workouts. So all the kind of good stuff along that end is what we're working on. Because right now we give you 12 different train methods that I've built over the years to do different types of cardiovascular training. And the next step will be putting those into actual workouts that you can do yourself and share with different people. And the cool thing about Morpheus is, again, because, like I said, everyone's individual, but we can now give you a prescriptive guideline of, hey, spend roughly this many minutes in each of your heart rate zones. As long as you're doing that many minutes per week, how exactly you do them is a bit less important. I'm not saying lift weights for cardio, but if I'm doing a workout where I spend 20 minutes in my blue zone and 10 minutes in my red zone, or whatever the case may be, I can then share that with other people who want to do the same workout and get the same number of minutes in. But those zones are then unique to that individual. So what I'm basically trying to say is we can make working out a little bit more shareable and still be very individualized at the same thing, which is the hard part.
Yeah, which I think is super cool because that makes it more actionable. And for people doing coaching, like one of the hardest things I think to teach people is how to actually set up their aerobic training if they're not really necessarily an aerobic athlete. Because, like you said, there's a sweet spot where you still want to see positive adaptations, but we don't want to burn them out in doing this because they're not an endurance athlete. That's not the main thing they're doing. So to have people find out what that sweet spot is, so they're seeing those positive adaptations, that's super cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the, does not secret or anything, but one of the biggest things we do want to do in the rebuild here is give people a lot more insight into where they're heading, because there's just a lot of data. If you're talking about looking at heart rates for each workout and their sleep, their objective markers, all these other things, there's a lot of information coming in. And so what we really want to be able to do now is say, hey, you're going this direction, and here's the things we think you need to either adjust if you want to improve, or the things you need to keep doing if you want to keep improving, or whatever. So we're really trying to dig deeper into the analysis and give people a very clear roadmap of where they're headed. And that's the hard part of data, is making it really usable and easy to use. And so that's what we're working on.
The last quick question on Morpheus, is it just off a Bluetooth heart rate strap? Do they need any other extra equipment now?
Yeah. So for people that want to just use Morpheus to work out and record their workouts and look at their different heart rate zones, they can do that with any Bluetooth chest strap. For them to get the actual HRV and the recovery side, the weekly recommendations, they need our chest strap, our Morpheus chest strap, simply because there's such a wide range of Bluetooth devices out there, and the quality of the signal and getting the R intervals is such a hit or miss thing,
Yep.
that we wanted to really standardize the HRV piece, because that's what we're using to do all the research. And so for measuring HRV, you need our Morpheus chest strap. But for working out, you can use really any Bluetooth device you want.
Cool. And that's just that 8 weeks out is your site, and then trainwithmorpheus.com, correct?
Yep. Yep, exactly.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Great talking to you. And I'm sure you'll see you around again one of these days.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Really appreciate it. Huge thanks to Joel for coming on the podcast. Make sure to check out all of his great stuff he's got there at his website. He's got some great certifications. Check out Morpheus, which is awesome, especially if you're not working directly with a trainer, or you don't have any kind of oversight to watch your training intensity, or you're just trying to learn the ropes even of HRV and how it affects it. Morpheus is a great system to check out. And what I thought was super interesting, like we talked about on the podcast, on some of the data he has from that for people who are lifting and doing cardio, doing more lower to moderate intensity cardio is something I think most people miss out on. Again, there's a time and a place to still do high intensity, but if you're using a system like Morpheus or even HRV, you'll be able to figure some of these things out for yourself and for your clients, which is great. If you want my top 4 tips on HRV, go to MikeTNelson.com/flex4, F-L-E-X, the number 4, and you will get those directly. Also puts you on the Insider newsletter list. We've got the PhysFlex certification coming out very soon, October 14th on Monday. It'll open for exactly 1 week till October 21st, 2024. Go to physiologicflexibility.com. If you're already on the newsletter list, you will get all of that information automatically too. So thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. A huge thanks to Joel once again. Make sure to check out all of his stuff. If you have time, please forward this podcast to someone who you think would enjoy it. Give us the old download and subscribe and all the other cool whiz-bang things that help us with the old algorithm there to get this into more people's ear holes. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Talk to all of you next week.
What do you suppose they call that? A novelty act?
I don't know, but it wasn't too bad.
Well, that's a novelty.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.